Look, we need to have a conversation about James Maddison, guys. This is the next topic of the panel, and we're going to talk about if James Maddison's form is concerning, because we take it back to those first 10 games of the season, or 8 games I think it was for Maddison, where he was probably the best midfielder, best player in the Premier League at that point, controlling games, dominating factor in games, creating chance after chance after chance. Since he's come back, I mean, I don't think he's been bad by any stretch of the imagination. In certain games he has, but he just hasn't been to that same level that what we saw in those first 8 to 10 or however many games it was at the start of the season. So for you, Royce, is Maddison's form concerning?
I would say his recent run of performances to me shows how important the number 10 position is in Ange's system and how much it's needed for that position to play well. When you look at the majority of games that we play this season, regardless of the result, we have the majority of the possession, it feels like. And, sometimes we create our chances, but I feel like, to me, through the middle of the pitch, the number 10 seems to be the one responsible for, really creating the moves. And as we saw against West Ham, teams that sit in the low block really, really stuff the box, 8, 9 guys at a time. And I think that may be why we've been able to find more success on the wing, from moves from our wingers. And I feel, we're only going to see these defensive sides continue this trend until we're able to prove that we can beat it. And, so I think a conclusion that Ange has probably come to in the Premier League is that there's a lot of sides in this league that are more than happy to sit back and, kind of just let us take the game to them and then counter and take their chances when they can get them. And especially playing a team like Spurs, with the quality that we have, not everyone is going to come after us. And I think that we tend to play better against those teams that really come after us. But Maddison and Ange alike are going to have to, really figure out what they need to do in order to really break down and unlock these low blocks. Because if we can get Maddison to a point to where he's, consistent goal contributions against these really defensive sides, then I think it would elevate our entire team's performance level tenfold. I would say I'm getting a little bit concerned, but in my opinion, and this is a common saying that form is temporary and class is permanent. And those first 10 games of the season, watching Maddison play, I was like, yes, he is class. He is class. And Son, obviously, for the majority of last season, had a bit of a rough patch. And it's the same thing. He's now just banging in goals left and right. He's in the Golden Boot race and the Playmaker Award race as well. So I just feel we have to give him time to be able to make the technical adjustments, and Maddison as well, to be able to just really feel confident every game, regardless of how the team is going to play that we're playing against, that he's going to be able to, find that creative ball to really set up a move for us to score more often.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. Sai, what's your take on it? Are you concerned at all by Maddison's form?
No, not really. I think it's relatively down to the injury that he had.
He's been back for a while now, though. He's been back since latter stages of January.
He has, however, and I speak from experience, as far as I was aware, is a deltoid injury, to which I fractured my medial. Came right out of the socket, for those that like grim stories.
You're always breaking bones, Si. What is going on with you?
Oh yeah, I try not to play football, but when I do, it's terrible. So as I said, I speak from experience, only because I know these guys are obviously another level than I am on my Wednesday nights in Guildford. But it's the principle that deltoid muscle in that ankle area, mine was actually worse. Mine transferred across and upwards to the inside of the leg, all the way up to the knee, and it took me a year and a half to get the flex back and that pain threshold reduced, balancing feet, etc. Obviously they've got a lot more medical staff around them than I do have with my weekly physiotherapy session. But the point being is that I wouldn't say it was so much a psychological impact. I would imagine that he still has to probably maybe do specific stretches for it, or ice packing, etc. I don't know the full ins and outs of how far down the recovery line he is. But obviously, most players try to come back as soon as possible. But with the type of Maddison player that he is, if you think of how quick he turns, or glides past players, that requires those muscle groups to work very, very hard. And when they have been torn or stretched in that situation that he has, I don't know if it was an impact injury, which may have helped slightly, but for mine, because of the snap and the tear, it was a lot worse. But that can carry with you, and it can play on the mind as well. And I don't care how much you get paid, from a psychological perspective, it can affect the game. As I said, I'm not at that level, but when I was playing, I was finding it massively frustrating because I knew I could do more. I knew I could do this before, and I still can't yet. And as I said, it took me a year or so, time to do that. If you ever get a chance to research those muscle groups and how they can affect you, it's very interesting. But I'm not fussed about his form because, exactly as Royce said, that class is definitely there all the time, and we're starting to see snippets of it coming back. I think one of the key situations from being at the game and so close to the pitch where I sit at the stadium is he'll get into really good positions and then there's no one there to support him, or he's having to do double, triple work because some other people are not doing so, and that will affect his game in that sense because he's doing things that he perhaps doesn't need to be doing. So I think it's a load of different variables. And the instance of that carried injury, it doesn't go away. Don't care how long you have out. 4 or 5 weeks is just for the recovery. Then you have the strengthening process, and that can take a long time. So it's not an excuse. I think some of the other players can be pulled up for this kind of thing as well, but there's always usually a reason behind it. A top class player like that doesn't just disappear off form for no reason. I do honestly think that there would be some elements under the radar that perhaps people don't really consider or think. They just look at a player and maybe not as like a human side of things, of like how difficult it is to come back from these kind of injuries. So I'm not worried. I think he'll continue to keep improving. We saw that great goal that he scored against Villa. That shows you that he's getting his pace and momentum back. We're perhaps missing the extra trickery, and I honestly think that's because of the ankle, just purely from experience. But I may be corrected out there. But I have no issue with him coming back over these coming weeks, finish off the season well, and we're going to have a fully fit, hopefully, touch wood, Maddison for next season with all the new players hopefully coming in to add to that class.
Come on, Sim. Saw you gathering some stats, so hit us with it.
No, I'm just looking at Maddison's form on data wise, and there has been a drop off for sure over the last 9. Well, how long has he been fit for? 9-10 games now. So he obviously came back in that game against Man City in January in the FA Cup game. He came off the bench in that game, and I think he's pretty much started every game since then. And he was probably averaging like around 3 or 4 key passes during that period. He's now averaging around 2 key passes. Obviously, his goals and assists were quite significant. I think he got in his first 10 games, he got 3 goals and 6 assists. In the next 9 games now, he's got 1 goal and 3 assists. Obviously, that's 4 goal contributions in his last 9 games, which isn't horrific, but obviously, Maddison's capable of a lot more than that. But for me, I'm watching him play, and I'm not seeing a player who's completely off the pace or anything. I'm not seeing a player who's struggling in terms of physically. I still see him doing these same movements. I'm still seeing him glide past players. I'm still seeing him getting in good positions. What I'm seeing though at the moment, when he's getting to the final third, for one reason or another, it's not coming off for him. And we know that is Maddison's one of his biggest strengths. He's having a lot of shots blocked at the moment. A lot of his, for one reason or another, he's not being as creative as he usually can. But I am seeing him. I remember watching him very closely against West Ham on Tuesday, and I was seeing him doing some really impressive things when it comes to close control, getting past people, swiveling on the ball. But I think maybe there's extra attention on him, or at the moment, for one reason or another, when he's trying to pull these things off in the final third, whereas in the first 10 games, a lot of stuff was coming off for him. At the moment, he is struggling to pull off those moments of magic we know he's capable of. But that's not to say it won't come back. And the reason you saw me looking at stats, because I remember thinking early in the season, I thought, wasn't Martin Odegaard going through something quite similar near beginning of the season? And because I remembered that. So I looked at his stats. He went through a 10-game period where he got 1 assist. That's all he got in a 10-game period. I remember there was people saying, he's off form and all that kind of stuff. And I look at him now. He's been, last few weeks, he's been one of the best players in the league. I think that's just to say that just because a player goes through a prolonged period of poor form, or I should say poor form, doesn't mean that this is something to be overly concerned about in the long term. And I think definitely Maddison falls into that category. You've seen over a number of years how good of a player he's been for Leicester. We saw in the first 10 games how good he was for us. And even in these last 9 games, obviously it's been a drop-off from the first 10 games. I don't think anyone can get away from that. But as I was saying, it's always going to take a bit of time for him to get back to his best. Obviously, Spurs fans are hoping it wasn't going to take this long for him to reach those kind of heights. But I don't think it's like, I don't think he's been on the pitch and been a massive hindrance to us or has really been massively poor in form. I think he's playing okay. Some games he's played quite well. I thought against Aston Villa he played really well. There's been obviously some games he's been better than others. But we all want him to get back to those levels where he's in the first 10 games of the season, of course. So until he reaches that, he's always going to have question marks about when's that going to happen, when's that going to return, why aren't we seeing the best of Maddison? But I think people, who I see saying we need to have a conversation about him, maybe he needs to be dropped, all these kind of things. I think that needs to I don't think it's time for that kind of conversation just yet.
But, with the players that we do have knocking on the door, potentially Kulusevski in the 10, which we'll get into a bit later, Giovanni Lo Celso, who comes on and makes an impact pretty much every time. If he does have a couple of poor performances, do you not think that, because of the squad options that we do have, this is why we have a squad where if a player isn't, performing to the best of their abilities, then we can swap them out and change them up and change it up, for the starting lineup?
I would say that's more for when there's a lot of games, I would say. For someone like Maddison, who is obviously our vice-captain, who's so important to the team, who's still performing at a decent level. Like, I don't think he's performing at a droppable level, is my point. I don't think he's as good as he has been, but is he performing at such a poor level that we need to take him out of the team and he's dropped? I don't think he's at that stage, in my opinion. Maybe other people disagree. And maybe Andrew would feel like he would get a better performance out of Giovanni Lo Celso. Clearly, he doesn't feel that way because he's starting Maddison every game. Would I like if Maddison's not 100% and he's still struggling with something and he's not at his best, and maybe if we put Lo Celso in for a game or game or two and let him, show us what he can do in a perfect world? Maybe I'm not against that if we think we can get a better performance out of Lo Celso. But I'm not seeing a performance level from Maddison where I feel like he has to be dropped. That's my opinion at the moment. But yes, we do have a squad, and if players aren't playing at their best, should they come out? I guess that's a question. Is Maddison playing at the moment better than what Lo Celso is at his best? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think there's a case maybe that Lo Celso should have more game time than he has done. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm looking at Maddison's form, and I think to say I'm concerned about it is the wrong word. I agree with Royce and what Sai was saying. With James Maddison, I think it's a clear kind of case of form is temporary, class is permanent. And I think that's clear to see with James Maddison. He's a top player. You see that coming out even when he's not on having the best games. You see fits and spurts of it in the majority of games he's playing at. But I think it's clear for all to see that he's not playing at the same level and he's not having the same impact in games that he was having earlier on in the season before that injury. But I do think it's going to come back. And it's either do you play him through it and play him back into form, or do you take him out the firing line? Well, the way I'm wording it is a bit harsh. Is the way I'm wording it is to say like he's had a complete drop-off, because he hasn't had a complete drop-off. He's just not playing to the same levels as he was doing, getting a goal contribution a game essentially, where he's having like 3 goal contributions since the back end of January, or let's say beginning of February. So it's a weird one, or it's a hard one in which way you want to judge it, because I do think we do have players there that can step in, and when they do step in, they are playing well, and we have to have that awkward Dejan Kulusevski conversation as well. So Royce, do you think it's a case of playing him through it, or is it a case of maybe we should be using our squad a bit more?
So before I answer that question, I was just thinking of saying this while you guys were talking about it. in my opinion, when you go out and play a competitive football match, and you know everybody's really defending well, trying their hardest, the number 10 position is probably the most difficult, I would say, to perform well at the highest level. You know, as soon as you receive the ball, more often than not, there's somebody immediately on you. And especially considering how well Maddison performed in the beginning of the season, when teams are watching video, they're going to be like, we can't give Maddison any space at all, or he's just going to completely cut us open. And also, when you consider how long it took us to find another number 10, you know, how many times have we talked about how we've been dying for somebody since Eriksson to come in and really create and fill that void from the midfield. So for me, I think a combination of the things I just said would lead me to believe that it's too early to drop him. I trust Ange more than I trust the majority of football opinions in general. So he's the one who's watching, you know, trainings day in and day out. And if he believes that Maddison is the one to continue playing, then I think that's the right decision as well. But I think Lo Celso is honestly a quality player on his day. And he really, I mean, I don't know if we should sell him in the summer. That's a whole other conversation. But to my answer to that question would be, I think it's the best thing to continue playing him through this patch.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. To be fair, Sai, are you in agreement as well?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's exactly to that point that I think we've all kind of just said. Really, is that emphasis that there's only a few games left of the season, as some people are saying in the chat, obviously, but I think that it's a good opportunity for him to come into his own game again after everything that's happened over the last sort of couple of months for him, injury wise and everything like that. But some people say that in previous seasons he's kind of dipped off like this quite a few times, but you know, as I said, I think he's more than enough professional. He's a player that has the personality that Ange wants, the style that Ange wants as well. So it's not always all about being a top world-class player all the time. It's also the other things that we just don't see all the time, or things that happen behind the scenes. You know, it's very obvious that he is a charismatic character, someone that, you know, brings the team very closely. And of course, that element of leadership's in there as well. So there's a multitude of things as to why I'm not concerned about Maddison at all. I think there's a few other players that you could pick out that aren't, you know, playing to the best of their abilities, but that happens throughout a season all the time. You know, you can't just keep picking out a couple of players just because a few games have gone badly for them. I personally absolutely love watching Maddison on the ball every time I'm at the ground, you know. As I said, even an instance last week, you know, there's a few moments of time where he's on the edge of the box and there's no one to pass to, and therefore he has to go back and he gets frustrated with them all and he's shouting at them. What more could you want, like, from a player to be like, guys, we need to be better than this? And yes, of course, he probably thinks about that himself or for himself as well on top of that. But yeah, it's very easy for Spurs fans. We just sometimes pick on players too much, and then the next week they have a great game, and then we're changing our tune completely. That they're fantastic now. So I don't look too much into it. I just know he's a top player, a top guy. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing him hopefully step up a bit more in the next few games, like the rest of the team.